So the last thing we're going to do here in example 1 is blending our ranges. And I've mentioned here this concept of blending. Well, let's start looking at this from our own perspective first. We don't necessarily want to blend as much of our own ranges unless we have a scenario that kind of lends us to blending. And this is a scenario that kind of lends us to blending a little bit here. Let's go back to our example that we have. Our big blind is a break-even recreational player. He is studied enough to understand high-level range concepts, but is not going to be 3-betting from the blinds enough, especially with weaker hands. Well, in that case there, against that type of player, we can actually open wider. If we know that we're not going to get 3-bet as much, and we're going to be playing against a weaker opponent who is not likely to be at an edge against us, we also have position in this scenario here too, we can likely open a little wider than we normally would. Now, we do have to worry about the small blind still, in which case I would say if we did not have to worry about the small blind, we may be able to open much, 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 much wider. And we possibly could even open all of our range against this type of player. But the fact that we do have to worry about the small blind means that we can't go crazy, but we can add hands into our overall range because of this type of player. So what I'm going to do here is I have actually added some hands. And you can kind of see these are the hands that I've added. And I'm blending hands a little bit in here too. So I'll double click on this. So we start with our 610 combos, and I've brought this up to 682 combos here. So we've gone from about a 46% opening range to a 51% opening range by adding just about 70 combos here. And you can see the hands that I've added. So I've added a lot of these hands at 50% frequency. So I've added hands like, Jack 2 suited, Jack 3 suited, some of these hands on the cusps. And that's typically where you want to blend, is you want to blend on the cusps. I've added some of these offsuit hands as well here too. So I've really added these hands on the outsides here to basically say, in game, I may realize that my opponent is a weaker player and choose to open a little bit wider. It's not going to always happen, which is why I'm not going to always include these hands in range, but I'm going to add a little bit just to add some additional hands into my overall range because I know I can do so profitably against this type of opponent. Now let's look at it from our opponent's perspective. So this, as we can remember here, this is our upswing example. So this is our upswing ranges for our big blind defense. And this is not going to model reality as to what our opponent actually is going to do. That second piece there that we mentioned, our opponent is not going to be 3-betting from the blinds enough, particularly with weaker hands. Well, we know now that some of these hands at the bottom end of the range, they're going to be just pure calls. And then even some of these weaker hands at the top end of the range, I think those are going to be in the call range as well too. So I've actually adjusted my big blind defense to this range, and we can kind of hover over and see where I've added. So I've added hands here at both the bottom and the top. And I'll double click on this to kind of show you here. So we started off with 587 combos. We've gone up to 640 combos here. And what I've done here is I've actually added what I like to kind of call a gradients here in this blending process here. Very rarely are you going to see a scenario where an opponent goes from playing 100% of a hand in a range to 0% of a hand 1 pip higher. What's usually going to happen is there's going to be more of a gradual process, and we want to account for that here. So we can kind of visualize that through looking at kind of the pocket eights here. So pocket eights we have as they're going to be keeping in range 100% of the time in the call range. 9s and 10s, they're going to be in range 75% of the time. Jacks are going to be in range 50% of the time. And then queens are in range 25% of the time. Where kings and aces are not in range. Kings and aces are always 3-bet here. And I've done this with a lot of the hands in range here too. So going back to the upswing call frequencies, so you can kind of see here that all of these suited 10x hands, the Broadway suited 10x hands, this is kind of where it starts, kind of the 3-betting starts, and it just kind of cuts off right here. So all of these hands up here are being 3-bet in the upswing range. I've kind of slowed this transition a little bit here. So They're all calls here at the suited 9x. The suited 10x hands here are at 75% frequency. These hands, the suited Jack X and then King Queen suited here, are in at 50% frequency. And then Ace Queen suited, Ace King offsuit here are at 25% frequency. So this kind of gradient takes place here, and we've kind of blended in these assumptions into place. We've also taken a lot of these bottom end hands in range, and I essentially just kind of made them all 75%. So we're accounting for the fact that maybe our opponent does 3-bet them somewhat. Maybe they're able to find the 3-bet in some instances in their range, but for the overwhelming majority of the time, these cases are going to be in the call, not necessarily the 3-bet. And I think that ultimately brings us into a spot where we actually have a range where, from the out of position player, I'm pretty comfortable with this modeling our opponent as to someone who doesn't 3-bet hands enough, particularly hands at the weaker end of the spectrum. And then for ourselves, we are opening a little bit more widely than normal. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually go and build the tree. And we have to rebuild this tree again. And I'm actually going to have to go back in, because I've edited the tree. When I rebuild the tree like this, it's actually going to rebuild the tree using these examples again. So if I rebuild this tree again, I'm going to have to actually go back into this thing. And I'll just do this right now. I'll import my tree. And I'll delete this component here as well too. So I just have to redo this tree editing function again. But now my tree is built. I have my tree, I have my ranges, I have entered all the game details. I can now run the solver, and I'm going to run the solver to 1% accuracy. And we're going to kick off this solver, we're going to run it. And in module 4, we're going to start looking at the outputs of this example. But first, I'm going to go shift over to example 2, where we're going to do our blending exercise in example 2, and we can do that before we kick off the solver for that example as well too. So I'll see you over there. All right, so we're back over here in example 2 for the final video of this module, which is about blending. And in blending, we can start adjusting our ranges a little bit here for this solve. Now, I've mentioned here that this concept a few videos ago, I kind of called this reverse blending. And that was when I was looking at my own example here, kind of shifting from this big blind defense range to where I'm at now. I kind of reverse blended into this pure example here too. I'm going to choose not to blend at all for my own ranges here too. I may want to in some cases, because I can tell that there are probably going to be some scenarios where I'm probably kind of on the cusp hands. So maybe like these kind of suited connector hands, or maybe some of these kind of weaker hands, the King 5 suited, Ace 6 suited, Ace 4 suited. I'm pretty much purely going to be 3-betting Ace 5 suited there. But like some of these other hands, I might kind of blend a little bit. There might be some hands where I might choose to kind of add into this calling range, but I'm actually going to keep my own range constant here, because this is my own range. This is the range that I've studied, and I'm pretty sure that I can accurately execute my own 3-bet range in game. And when I'm tending to play an opponent who is a good professional player, I want to stick with my own ranges unless I have a reason to believe that I should deviate from those ranges somewhat. If I thought my opponent was far better than me, so in that case there, maybe I thought my opponent was a professional player who just was much, much better than me. I'm playing like Caxton or something like that. In that case there, I'm probably going to be 3-betting less and bring some of these kind of weaker hands into my calling range. I might even retain some of the stronger hands in my calling range as well too, just to kind of beef up my big blind defense range. But against just a regular typical pro who might be playing at a casino, I'm not going to necessarily change my ranges or deviate from them, one way or the other. So I'm going to keep my own range, and I'm not going to necessarily blend my own range. And then my opponent's range, it kind of already is blended. There are some kind of mixes here, and that's kind of the point of equilibrium ranges. Equilibrium ranges does account for some of that blending. It accounts for the fact that some of these cusp hands that might not always be in the range are in the range sometimes. So we actually don't even have to blend our opponent's range either. So now we have two sets of ranges, again, that are, we're comfortable with our ranges, we're comfortable with the game tree that we've put together. Let's actually run the solver. And we're going to run this to 1%, and we're going to run this solver. And in module 4, we'll come back and we'll look at some of the outputs. But let's end this video, and we'll shift over into PioSolver, where we'll wrap everything up, talk about blending in our examples 3 and 4 over there.